get married to me when you can't make me feel like a woman?
3 years of marriage. He refused to touch her until the billionaire chose to claim his wife. For 3 long years, Christy lived in a cold, loveless marriage, bound by vows, yet untouched by the man who called himself her husband. Every night, she cried silently beside him, wondering why he married her at all. But when the billionaire finally decided to claim his wife, the truth that came to light shattered everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and sacrifice. Before we begin, please subscribe. It's free, and it makes my day 100% better. Also like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comment section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin our wonderful story. The clock struck midnight in the penthouse overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline, and Christy James sat alone on the edge of their California king bed, her silk nightgown feeling like a costume she'd been forced to wear for an audience that never showed. 3 years. 1,095 nights of sleeping beside a man who treated her like fragile china, beautiful to look at but too delicate to touch. Elliot James, the billionaire tech mogul whose face graced Forbes covers and whose name made Wall Street traders sit up straighter, was a husband in name only. The marriage certificate hanging in his office was real. The wedding photos displayed in their living room were real. But the marriage itself? That existed only in the eyes of the law and the society pages that documented their every public appearance. Christy pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting back tears that had become as familiar as her own reflection. She could hear Elliot in his study down the hall, the soft clicking of his keyboard echoing through the vast apartment like a metronome counting down the seconds of her slowly dying heart. He was always working, always busy, always just out of reach. Their wedding night had been the first sign of what was to come. After the elaborate ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral, after the reception where 500 guests had toasted their future, after they'd returned to this very penthouse, Elliot had kissed her forehead with the tenderness one might show a sister and retreated to the guest room. "I'm exhausted," he'd said, his green eyes, those same eyes that had once looked at her with something that might have been love, sliding away from her face. "The merger closes tomorrow. I need to be sharp." Christy had stood in the master bedroom in her ivory lingerie, feeling foolish and confused, wondering if perhaps wedding night traditions were outdated, if perhaps successful men like Elliot operated on different timelines than ordinary people. She'd convinced herself it was just nerves, just stress, just temporary. But temporary became permanent. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. Now, at 28 years old, Christy felt like she was slowly disappearing. Not the dramatic disappearance of a person who vanishes into thin air, but the gradual fading of someone who realizes they've become invisible to the one person who should see them most clearly. The irony wasn't lost on her. Women across Manhattan would kill to be in her position, married to Elliot James, living in a penthouse worth $40 million, wearing clothes that cost more than most people's cars, attending galas and benefits where champagne flowed like water and everyone knew your name. But none of them knew the truth. None of them saw Elliot's careful distance, the way he timed his showers for when she was out of the bedroom, the way he worked 18-hour days and traveled to the London office at least twice a month, the way he touched her in public with practiced affection but actually flinched, when her hand accidentally brushed his in private. Christy stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Below, the city pulsed with life. Taxis streamed down Fifth Avenue. Couples walked hand in hand through Central Park. Somewhere out there, people were falling in love, making love, fighting, and reconciling, living lives that were messy and complicated and real. Her life was a beautiful lie wrapped in Hermes scarves and diamond earrings. The door opened behind her, and Christy's heart did what it always did when Elliot entered a room. It stuttered hopefully, pathetically, like a dog that keeps returning to an owner who never pets it. "You're still awake," Elliot said, his voice carrying that distinctive blend of British boarding school and Harvard Business School that made investors hang on his every word. He'd loosened his tie, and his dark hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, a habit he had when he was problem-solving. "Couldn't sleep," Christy replied, not turning around. She couldn't bear to look at him right now, couldn't bear to see his perfectly handsome face with its sharp jawline and those eyes that looked at her with polite concern but never hunger, never desire, never love. "I have to leave for Tokyo tomorrow afternoon," Elliot said, and Christy heard him moving around the room, probably gathering his things to retreat to the guest room where he'd spent every night of their 3-year marriage. "The Tanaka deal is getting complicated. I'll probably be gone for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Christy almost laughed. 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. What difference did it make? He was already gone, had always been gone, might as well be on another planet for all the connection they shared. Christy. His voice was closer now, and she felt him standing behind her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, Tom Ford, smoky and expensive. "Are you all right?" This was the moment. This was the moment when she could turn around and finally ask the question that had been building inside her like a pressure cooker about to explode. Why did you marry me if you never wanted me? But she didn't. Because Christy had learned over 3 years that some questions were too dangerous to ask. Some answers were too painful to hear. And some marriages were built on foundations of sand that would crumble completely if you dared to examine them too closely. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside her. "Have a safe trip." She felt rather than saw him hesitate, felt the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air between them. Then the moment passed, as it always did, and she heard his footsteps retreating, heard the door close with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking. Only when she was certain he was gone did Christy let herself cry, pressing her fist against her mouth to muffle the sobs that shook her entire body. Because the worst part wasn't that Elliot didn't want her. The worst part was that despite everything, despite 3 years of rejection and loneliness and slowly dying inside, she still wanted him. She still loved him. God help her, she still loved him. The next morning arrived with the kind of brilliant sunshine that felt like a personal insult. Christy stood in the kitchen of their penthouse, mechanically making coffee she didn't want and toast she wouldn't eat, going through the motions of pretending to be a wife in a marriage that existed only on paper. Elliot emerged from the guest room, not the master bedroom they were supposed to share, never the master bedroom, looking immaculate in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. His hair was perfectly styled, his jaw freshly shaven, his expression carefully neutral. He looked like he was preparing for a board meeting, not saying goodbye to his wife before a 2-week trip. "Coffee?" Christy offered, her voice bright and brittle, the same voice she used at the charity luncheons where she smiled until her face hurt and made small talk about fundraisers and galas and anything except the gaping emptiness of her actual life. "Already had some," Elliot replied, not quite meeting her eyes. He never quite met her eyes anymore. She'd started noticing that about 6 months into their marriage, the way his gaze would slide past her face, focusing on her forehead or her shoulder or some point just beyond her left ear, anywhere except direct eye contact. "Elliot." The word came out sharper than she'd intended, and she saw him tense, his shoulders drawing up almost imperceptibly. "We need to talk." "I have a flight to catch," he said immediately, glancing at the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, a wedding gift from his father, she remembered, given with a handshake rather than a hug because the James family didn't do demonstrations of affection. She should have recognized the warning signs then. "You always have a flight to catch." Christy set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary, the sharp clink echoing through the cavernous kitchen with its marble countertops and professional-grade appliances that she'd never learned to use because they had a private chef who came 3 times a week. Or a meeting. Or a conference call. Or a sudden emergency that requires your immediate attention anywhere except here, anywhere except with me. Elliot's jaw tightened. "Christy, this isn't the time." "When is the time?" She heard her voice rising, heard the desperation bleeding through despite her best efforts to remain calm and collected and perfectly poised like the Christy James the world saw in magazines. "When, Elliot?" "Because we've been married for 3 years, and I can count on one hand the number of real conversations we've had. I can count on one finger the number of times you've." She stopped, her cheeks burning. She couldn't say it, couldn't voice the most humiliating truth of all, that her husband had never made love to her, had never even tried, had never looked at her with anything resembling desire in his eyes. "Christy." Elliot's voice was low, almost pained. He finally looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment she saw something flash across his face. Pain. Guilt. Regret. It was gone before she could identify it. You knew what this marriage was when you agreed to it. The words hit her like a physical blow. Christy actually took a step backward, her hand gripping the edge of the counter for support. What this marriage was, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. What are you talking about? Elliot's expression shuddered closed, and she watched him retreat behind the walls he'd built so high and so thick that she'd never been able to scale them. Nothing. Forget I said anything. I really do need to go. But Christy was done forgetting, done ignoring, done pretending that everything was fine when her life felt like a beautiful trap closing around her inch by inch. No. She moved to block the doorway, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. You don't get to say something like that and then just leave. What did you mean? I knew what this marriage was. What was it, Elliot? What is it? Because from where I'm standing, it's not a marriage at all. It's barely even a friendship. We are roommates who happen to have the same last name and show up together for photo opportunities. Christy, move. Tell me the truth. Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for the tears that were building behind her eyes, hated herself for caring so much, for wanting so badly to understand why the man she loved treated her like an expensive piece of furniture, nice to have around, occasionally useful for decoration, but ultimately just an object. Please. After 3 years, don't I at least deserve the truth? Elliot stared at her for a long moment, and she watched something war in his expression. Duty versus honesty, perhaps, or self-preservation versus the conscience he usually kept so carefully controlled. Finally, he spoke, and his words destroyed the last fragile hope she'd been clinging to. Our marriage was a business arrangement, he said, his voice flat and emotionless. My father made it clear that I needed to settle down, project stability for the company. Your father's architectural firm was on the verge of bankruptcy, drowning in debt from that failed Dubai project. We both got what we needed. I got the family man image that satisfied the board and the shareholders, and your father got the capital infusion that saved his company. You got financial security and a position in society that you never could have achieved otherwise. Christy felt like she was falling, like the floor had opened up beneath her feet and she was tumbling through space with nothing to catch her. That's not true, she whispered, but even as she said it, memories were flooding back. Her father's sudden insistence that she attend that charity gala where she'd met Elliot, the way her father had practically pushed her into Elliot's orbit, the speed with which everything had happened. 1 month from introduction to engagement. Another month from engagement to wedding. No dating period. No courtship. No slow building of trust and intimacy. Just a contract disguised as a courtship, a merger disguised as a marriage. Your father never told you. Elliot's voice held something that might have been surprise. I assumed you knew. I assumed you were part of the negotiations. Negotiations. Christy's voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. My father negotiated my marriage like I was. Like I was. An asset, Elliot finished quietly. A valuable asset to be leveraged for mutual benefit. The coffee cup slipped from Christy's numb fingers and shattered on the marble floor, dark liquid spreading across the white stone like blood. Neither of them moved to clean it up. So these 3 years. Christy spoke slowly, carefully, like someone navigating a minefield. The separate bedrooms, the distance, the way you flinch when I touch you. It's because I was never your wife. I was just part of a business deal. Christy. Does everyone know? She looked up at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as the husband she'd loved and tried desperately to please, but as a stranger who'd been lying to her every single day. All those people at the galas and the benefits and the fundraisers, do they all know that our marriage is fake? Am I the only one stupid enough to believe it was real? It's not like that. Then what is it like, Elliot? She was shouting now, her composure crumbling completely. Explain it to me. Make me understand how a man can stand up in a church and make vows before God and everyone we know, and then treat his wife like she's contaminated. Make me understand how you can live with someone for 3 years and never once, not once, touch them like they're desirable or wanted or even human. Because I can't. Elliot's shout matched hers, and the raw emotion in his voice shocked them both into silence. He ran his hands through his hair, destroying the perfect styling, his chest heaving. Because if I touch you, if I let myself want you, then this stops being a business arrangement and becomes real. And I can't let it become real. Christy stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he was saying. Why not? She asked, her voice small. Elliot laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. You really don't know, do you? You have no idea what it's been like, living with you, watching you, seeing you every day looking so beautiful and kind and genuine in a world full of artificial people. You don't know what it costs me to keep my distance, to pretend I don't notice the way you look in the morning with your hair messy and your face free of makeup. You don't know how many nights I've stood outside your bedroom door wanting to walk in and finally be your husband in every sense of the word. Christy's breath caught. Then why don't you? Because you deserve better. The words came out low and fierce. Because this marriage was built on a lie, and you deserve someone who chose you, not someone who acquired you as part of a package deal to satisfy his father's requirements. Because every time I look at you, I'm reminded that I took advantage of your father's desperation and your innocence, and that you're trapped in a marriage you never would have chosen if you'd known the truth. He moved to the door, and this time Christy didn't try to stop him. I'm setting you free, Christy, Elliot said without turning around. When I get back from Tokyo, I'll have my lawyers draw up the divorce papers. You'll get a generous settlement, enough that you'll never have to worry about money again. You can have the penthouse if you want it. You can have whatever you want. Just be happy. Find someone who deserves you. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything. Christy stood in the kitchen surrounded by the ruins of her shattered coffee cup and her shattered illusions, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something other than hopeless longing. She felt angry. 3 days after Elliot left for Tokyo, Christy stood in the middle of the penthouse living room and surveyed her life with the cold, analytical eye of someone who'd finally stopped lying to herself. The room was decorated in shades of cream and beige, with carefully curated art on the walls and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a home. Nothing personal. Nothing that reflected her taste or her personality. Nothing that said Christy lives here rather than expensive interior designer lives here. Because she'd never really lived here. She'd existed here. She'd occupied space here. But living, real, messy, authentic living, that hadn't happened in this beautiful, sterile cage. Her phone buzzed with another text from her mother. Darling, lunch tomorrow at La Grenouille? The ladies are all asking about you and Elliot. Don't forget to wear that Chanel suit I sent you. Christy stared at the message, thinking about all the lunches she'd attended, all the questions she deflected with practiced smiles, all the lies she'd told to protect Elliot's reputation and her father's business interests and the carefully constructed facade of their perfect marriage. She was done lying. She was done protecting people who traded her like a commodity. She was done being the decorative wife who knew her place and never made waves. Christy pulled up her contacts and called a number she'd saved months ago but never had the courage to actually dial. Sinclair Investigations, a crisp female voice answered. Yes, hi. My name is Christy James, and I'd like to hire you to investigate my father and my husband. The words felt powerful, like taking back control of her own life. I want to know everything about the deal they made. Every email, every meeting, every conversation. I want proof of exactly what I was worth to them. Mrs. James, the woman said carefully, are you certain? This kind of investigation can sometimes reveal things that are difficult to confront. I've spent 3 years living a lie, Christy replied. I think I can handle the truth. By that evening, Christy had made a list, not of the things she was losing, but of the things she was reclaiming. Her identity, her autonomy, her future. And the first step in reclaiming her future was remembering who she'd been before Elliot James and merger negotiations and society pages. She pulled out her old portfolio from the back of her closet, the one she'd put away when she'd become Mrs. Elliot James because billionaire wives didn't need careers, didn't need ambitions beyond charity work and looking beautiful at events. The drawings were 3 years old now, but looking at them, Christy felt something stir inside her that had been dormant for so long she'd almost forgotten it existed. Passion. She'd loved art, had dreamed of being a painter, had actually been good at it before her father had made it clear that such impractical pursuits were for people who could afford to be impractical. People like her couldn't afford dreams. They had to be practical. They had to marry well and secure their futures and sacrifice their own desires for the family's financial stability. Except her father's financial problems had been solved 3 years ago with Elliot's money, and Christy had received exactly nothing in return except a loveless marriage and a wardrobe full of clothes she didn't choose. She spent that night painting for the first time in 3 years, covering canvas after canvas with bold strokes of color that felt like releasing pressure from a valve that had been shut too tight for too long. She painted her anger in reds and blacks. She painted her loneliness in blues and grays. She painted her hope, tentative and fragile but still alive, in yellows and golds that brightened as the dawn light started streaming through the windows. When the sun rose over Manhattan, Christy stood back and looked at what she'd created. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't polished. It wasn't something that would hang in the carefully curated perfection of the penthouse living room. It was real. It was honest. It was hers. Her phone buzzed again. Another text, but this time not from her mother. It was from Elliot. Tanaka deal is done. Coming home early. We need to talk. Christy stared at the message for a long moment, then set down her paintbrush and picked up her phone. She typed back, "Yes, we do." But this time, the conversation would be on her terms. The text from Elliot changed everything and nothing. Changed because Christy now knew she could survive his absence, had actually thrived in it, rediscovering parts of herself she'd forgotten existed. Nothing because the fundamental truth remained. Her marriage was built on a lie, and Elliot was planning to divorce her. Christy spent the next 2 days preparing. She met with Sinclair Investigations and reviewed their preliminary findings, emails between her father and Elliot's lawyers, financial records showing the exact amount of money that had changed hands, even a fucking prenuptial agreement she'd signed without reading because her father had assured her it was standard paperwork and she trusted him. The amount of her worth in that contract made her feel physically sick. $10 million, transferred to her father's company in 3 installments over the first year of marriage. Her entire life, her entire future, valued at $10 million. She'd been sold. There was no other word for it. Her father had sold her to save his company, and Elliot had bought her to satisfy his father's demands for a stable, married heir to the James Empire. When Elliot's text came through saying he'd landed and was on his way to the penthouse, Christy was ready. She'd carefully removed every trace of her painting session, but she'd left something else out, the investigation file, sitting prominently on the coffee table where he couldn't miss it. She was wearing jeans and a simple white t-shirt, her own clothes, not the designer outfits that Elliot's personal shopper always selected for her. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face was free of makeup. This was Christy Winters, the woman she'd been before she became Christy James, the woman she was going to be again. Elliot arrived at 7 in the evening, looking exhausted in a way that money and power couldn't fix. His suit was rumpled, his tie was loose, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd slept even less than usual during his trip. He stopped short when he saw her, his gaze taking in her casual appearance with something that looked like surprise. "Christy." He set down his briefcase and started to say something else, then noticed the file on the coffee table. His expression shifted, became wary. "What's that?" "The truth," Christy replied calmly. "Or at least, a version of it that doesn't require me to take anyone's word for anything. Emails between my father and your lawyers. Financial records. The prenuptial agreement I apparently signed without reading. It's all there." Elliot's jaw tightened. "You hired an investigator." "I hired someone to tell me the truth since my husband and my father both seemed incapable of it." Christy moved to the windows, needing distance between them. "Did you know that I'm worth $10 million? That's what you paid my father. $10 million in 3 installments. I found the payment schedule and everything." "Christy." "No." She turned to face him, and the anger she'd been carefully controlling blazed through her voice. "You said you were going to set me free. You said I deserved better. Well, you're right. I do deserve better. I deserve better than a husband who made me feel worthless for 3 years. I deserve better than a father who sold me like I was livestock. I deserve better than this entire situation." Elliot flinched as if she'd struck him. "I know. That's why I'm offering you the divorce. That's why I'm prepared to give you whatever settlement you want. I don't want your money." Christy was shouting now, all her careful control disintegrating. Don't you understand that? I never wanted your money. I wanted you. I loved you, Elliot. From the moment we met, I thought. I believed. She laughed bitterly. I believed in fairy tales. I believed that the handsome billionaire had chosen me, plain Christy Winters, because he saw something special in me. I believed I was lucky. I believed our marriage was real. Christy. Elliot took a step toward her, his hands held out like he was approaching a wounded animal. Please listen to me. Why should I? But even as she said it, Christy felt her anger starting to crack, revealing the hurt underneath. Why should I listen to anything you say when everything between us has been a lie? Not everything. Elliot's voice was low, intense. Not the way I feel about you. That was never a lie. Christy stared at him, wanting to believe him, wanting so desperately to believe that something about their relationship had been real. You said you couldn't let it become real, she said finally. You said you couldn't touch me because then it would stop being a business arrangement. I also said you deserved better than someone who acquired you as part of a package deal. Elliot moved closer, and this time Christy didn't step away. I meant that. You deserve someone who chose you freely, who pursued you because they couldn't imagine their life without you, not someone who essentially purchased you to satisfy his father's demands. So instead you chose to make me miserable. Christy's voice broke. You chose to reject me every single day for 3 years because you felt guilty about the circumstances of our marriage. I chose to protect you from getting more deeply involved with someone who didn't deserve you. Elliot's voice was rough with emotion. I chose to keep my distance because I knew that if I let myself love you, really love you, I'd never be able to let you go. And you deserve to be set free. You don't get to make that choice for me. Christy's hands were shaking. You don't get to decide what I deserve or what's best for me or whether I should be protected from my own feelings. I'm not a child, Elliot. I'm not a possession. I'm a person with my own agency and my own choices, and you've spent 3 years treating me like I'm too fragile or too stupid to handle the truth. You're right. Elliot looked devastated, and for the first time since their wedding night, she saw real, unguarded emotion on his face. You're absolutely right. I've been a coward. I've hidden behind guilt and nobility when the truth is I was just afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of how much I want you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Afraid that if I let myself have you, if I let myself love you the way I've wanted to since the moment I met you, I'd never be able to make up for the fact that our marriage started as a transaction. Afraid that you'd wake up one day and realize you'd wasted your life on someone who took advantage of your father's desperation. Christy felt tears streaming down her face, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. Do you have any idea what the last 3 years have been like for me? Lying next to you every night, or at least, sleeping in the same apartment as you, wondering what was wrong with me, wondering why I wasn't pretty enough or smart enough or interesting enough to make my own husband want me. God, Christy. Elliot's voice cracked. There's nothing wrong with you. You're perfect. You're so far beyond anything I deserve that I... Stop. Christy held up her hand. Stop telling me what you deserve or don't deserve. Stop making this about your guilt or your noble intentions. If you want a divorce, if you want me gone, then just say so. But don't hide behind martyrdom and self-sacrifice. At least give me the honesty of knowing whether you actually want me gone or whether you're pushing me away because you think it's what's best for me. Elliot stared at her for a long moment, and Christy saw him struggle with something, the same struggle she'd glimpsed before, duty versus desire, what he thought he should do versus what he wanted to do. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't want you gone. I've never wanted you gone. I want you so much it physically hurts. I want to fall asleep beside you and wake up next to you and spend every moment of every day with you. I want to touch you and hold you and finally, be your husband in every possible way. I want to erase the last 3 years and start over and do everything right this time. Christy felt like she couldn't breathe. Then why haven't you? Because I'm afraid. Elliot's voice was raw, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard before. I'm afraid that once you see who I really am, Once you see the ruthless businessman who is willing to essentially purchase a wife to satisfy his father's demands, you'll hate me. I'm afraid that the moment I touch you, you'll realize that I'm not worth 3 years of loneliness and rejection. I'm afraid that I'll finally have everything I want and then lose it because I don't deserve to keep it. Christy walked toward him slowly, deliberately, until she was standing close enough to feel the heat of his body. You're right about one thing, she said quietly. I do deserve better than the last 3 years. I deserve better than a husband who keeps me at arm's length out of misplaced nobility. I deserve better than sleeping alone and crying myself to sleep and wondering what's wrong with me. She saw Elliot's face crumble, saw him starting to pull away, to retreat behind his walls again. But I also deserve the chance to decide for myself what I want, Christy continued, reaching up to cup his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. I deserve the chance to know my husband, the real man, not the perfect facade he shows the world. I deserve the chance to decide whether I can forgive him for lying to me, for buying me, for keeping me at a distance when all I wanted was to be close to him. And what do you decide? Elliot's voice was barely audible. Christy stood on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, softly at first, then with increasing passion as 3 years of longing and frustration and desperate love poured out of her. For a moment, Elliot stood frozen, like a man who'd forgotten how to respond to human touch. Then something broke inside him, and he was kissing her back with a hunger that took her breath away, his hands gripping her waist, pulling her against him, 3 years of restraint shattering in an instant. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Elliot rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said roughly. I've loved you from the moment I met you at that charity gala. I loved you when I agreed to my father's stupid plan. I loved you on our wedding night when I walked away from you because I was too much of a coward to admit that our marriage wasn't just a business arrangement to me. I've loved you every single day for 3 years while I was slowly dying inside from wanting you and thinking I didn't deserve you. Christy felt more tears streaming down her face, but this time they were different. Not tears of pain and rejection, but tears of relief and hope and love. I love you too, she whispered. I've loved you even when I hated you. I've loved you even when I thought you couldn't stand to touch me. I've loved you through 3 years of the most painful loneliness I've ever experienced. I'm so sorry. Elliot's voice broke. I'm so sorry for every night you cried yourself to sleep. I'm sorry for making you feel unwanted when you're the most desirable woman I've ever known. I'm sorry for being too proud and too stupid to just tell you the truth from the beginning. We both made mistakes, Christy said. I should have demanded answers earlier. I should have confronted you instead of just accepting the situation. I should have had more faith in myself. No. Elliot pulled back enough to look at her directly. You trusted your husband and your father. That's not a mistake. That's what you should have been able to do. They were the ones who betrayed that trust. I was the one who betrayed that trust. Christy took his hand and led him to the couch, pulling him down beside her. Tell me everything. No more secrets. No more protecting me from the truth. Tell me exactly how this marriage came about. Elliot took a deep breath and began to speak, and as Christy listened to the story of how her father had approached Elliot's father, how the deal had been structured, how Elliot had initially agreed because he thought a marriage of convenience made logical sense for someone who'd never believed in love anyway, until he'd met her at that gala and realized that love wasn't something you could logic away, she felt the last of her illusions crumbling. But underneath the illusions was something stronger, truth. Painful, complicated truth, but truth nonetheless. My father declared bankruptcy last month, Christy said when Elliot had finished. Did you know that? Elliot shook his head, looking stunned. Your $10 million bought him 3 more years, but he spent it on the same risky projects that had gotten him into trouble in the first place. He lost everything. Christy laughed without humor. So in the end, he sold me for nothing. The company's gone. The money's gone. And is moving to Florida to live with my aunt because he can't afford his Manhattan apartment anymore. Christy, I'm so sorry. Don't be. Christy looked at him directly. I'm not. He made his choices. He prioritized his business over his daughter. He lied to me and manipulated me and treated me like a commodity to be traded. I'm done feeling sorry for him or making excuses for him. What do you want to do? Elliot asked carefully. About us, I mean. About our marriage. Christy considered the question seriously. 3 days ago, she would have said she wanted a divorce, wanted freedom, wanted to escape from the beautiful prison of her life as Mrs. Elliot James. But that was before she knew the truth. That was before Elliot had finally been honest with her. That was before she'd seen him vulnerable and afraid and deeply, genuinely in love with her. I want to start over, she said finally. Not erase the last 3 years. We can't do that, and maybe we shouldn't. Those 3 years taught us things about ourselves and each other. But I want to start over from today. I want a real marriage. I want honesty and communication and all the messy, complicated things that real relationships have. I want to fight with you and make up with you and fall asleep in your arms and wake up beside you. I want everything we should have had from the beginning. Are you sure? Elliot's voice was filled with wonder and something that looked like hope. Are you sure you can forgive me? Trust me again. No, Christy said honestly. I'm not sure. Trust has to be rebuilt, and that takes time. But I'm willing to try if you are. I'm willing to work for this marriage if you're finally willing to actually have this marriage. Elliot pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious he'd almost lost. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for the last 3 years, he promised. I'll spend every day showing you how much I love you, how much I want you, how much you mean to me. Start now, Christy whispered against his lips. Start right now. This time when Elliot kissed her, there was no hesitation. No holding back, no walls between them. This time when he lifted her into his arms and carried her toward the master bedroom, finally their bedroom, Christy felt like she was finally coming home. The night that followed was everything Christy had dreamed of for 3 years and more than she'd ever imagined. Elliot was tender and passionate and utterly devoted to making up for every moment of rejection, every night of loneliness, every tear she'd cried thinking she wasn't enough. You're everything, he whispered against her skin. You've always been everything. And for the first time since their wedding night 3 years ago, Christy fell asleep in her husband's arms, feeling wanted and loved and finally whole. The next morning, Christy woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows and Elliot's arm wrapped around her waist. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. It felt too perfect, too much like the fantasy she'd clung to for 3 years. Then Elliot stirred beside her, his lips brushing against her shoulder, and she knew it was real. Good morning, he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. Good morning, Christy replied, turning in his arms to face him. In the morning light, without the armor of his perfectly tailored suits and carefully composed expression, Elliot looked younger, more vulnerable, more real. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was a dream, Elliot said, echoing her own thoughts. That you'll have changed your mind. That you'll realize you deserve so much better than. Christy pressed her fingers to his lips. Stop. We agreed. No more of you telling me what I deserve. I'm a grown woman, and I get to decide what I want. And I want this. I want you. Understand? Elliot captured her hand and kissed her palm. Understood. They spent the morning in bed, talking in a way they never had before, really talking, about Elliot's complicated relationship with his father, about Christy's childhood dreams of being an artist, about the loneliness they'd both felt in their supposedly perfect life. I used to stand outside your bedroom door at night, Elliot confessed, his voice low. After I'd hear you crying. I'd stand there with my hand on the doorknob, wanting to go to you, wanting to comfort you, but convinced that you were crying because you were trapped in a loveless marriage and my presence would only make it worse. Christy's heart clenched. I was crying because I thought you didn't want me, because I thought there was something fundamentally wrong with me that made me unlovable. There's nothing wrong with you, Elliot said fiercely. You're perfect. You're brilliant and kind and beautiful and creative and everything I could have ever wanted in a partner. Then why did your father have to force you to marry? The question had been nagging at Christy since Elliot's confession. If you really loved me from the moment we met, why not just court me properly? Why the business arrangement? Elliot was silent for a long moment. Because I didn't believe I deserved to be loved. My parents' marriage was a disaster. My mother was miserable, trapped with a man who valued his company more than his family. When she died, my father didn't even take a day off work for the funeral. I learned from him that love was a weakness, that emotions were something to be controlled and suppressed, that marriage was just another business transaction. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Christy now recognized as his tell when he was struggling with difficult emotions. When my father demanded I get married to improve the company's image, I told myself it made sense. A marriage of convenience was logical. It didn't require vulnerability or emotional risk. And then I met you at that gala, and everything I thought I knew about myself turned out to be wrong. What do you mean? I mean that I looked at you across that ballroom, and for the first time in my life, I wanted something that wasn't part of a 5-year strategic plan. I wanted you so badly it terrified me. So I convinced myself I could have you without risk. I could marry you as part of the business arrangement and keep my distance, keep my emotions controlled, protect myself from becoming like my father, from turning into the kind of man who destroys the people he's supposed to love. Christy was beginning to understand. You weren't just protecting me from a marriage built on a lie. You were protecting yourself from getting hurt. Yes. Elliot's admission was barely a whisper. I'm not proud of it. I spent 3 years being a coward because I was more afraid of loving you than I was concerned about hurting you. I told myself I was being noble, but really I was just afraid. Christy took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. We are both afraid. Love is terrifying. But we can be afraid together, and we can choose to love each other anyway. When did you become so wise? Elliot asked with a small smile. 3 years of marriage to an emotionally unavailable billionaire teaches you a lot about yourself, Christy replied with a slight edge to her voice. Speaking of which, we need to talk about your father. Elliot's expression darkened. My father is no longer part of my life. I told him that when I left for Tokyo. He tried to arrange another business marriage for my brother. Apparently, I'd set such a successful precedent, and I told him that if he went through with it, I'd resign from the company and take half the board with me. Christy sat up in surprise. You'd leave James Industries. In a heartbeat. Elliot's voice was firm. I've spent my entire life trying to win my father's approval, trying to be the son he wanted, the executive he needed. But I'm done sacrificing my happiness and other people's lives for his ambitions. My brother deserves better. You deserved better. And I deserve to build a life that's mine, not just an extension of my father's empire. What did he say? He said I was weak. That love makes men weak. Elliot's jaw tightened. I told him that maybe weakness is just another word for being human, and I'd rather be weak and human than strong and empty like him. Christy felt a surge of pride for this man who'd finally stood up to the father who'd shaped his entire worldview. How did that feel? Terrifying. Liberating. Like I was finally becoming myself instead of the person I thought I had to be. Elliot pulled Christy back down beside him. You did that. You made me want to be better, to be real, to stop hiding behind walls and spreadsheets and strategic plans. We did that together, Christy corrected. I spent 3 years being passive, accepting a situation that made me miserable because I was too afraid to rock the boat. I'm done with that too. No more being the perfect, decorative wife who never makes waves. Good, Elliot said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Because I don't want a perfect, decorative wife. I want you, messy and complicated and real. They were interrupted by the buzz of Christy's phone on the nightstand. She reached for it and saw her mother's name flashing on the screen, along with approximately 15 missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. Oh no, Christy murmured, scanning through the messages. Oh no, no, no. What is it? Elliot sat up, alert. My mother. Christy felt her stomach drop. She's seen the Sinclair investigation file. She came by yesterday to drop off another designer outfit she thought I should wear, and she used her key to let herself in. She found the file on the coffee table. Elliot's expression went from concern to grim. What does she know? Everything, apparently. Christy read through the messages with growing horror. She's furious. She's demanding I meet her for lunch today. She's threatening to, oh my God, she's threatening to go to the press with the whole story if I don't agree to fix this situation immediately. She can't do that, Elliot said immediately. We'll get an injunction. No. Christy set down her phone with a decisive click. No more hiding. No more protecting people who don't deserve it. I'll meet with her. I'll tell her exactly what I think of her and my father and this entire messed up situation. Christy, be reasonable. If this gets out, it could destroy your reputation. My reputation as what? The perfect billionaire's wife? I don't want that reputation anymore. Christy climbed out of bed and started getting dressed. I spent 3 years protecting everyone else's image, everyone else's interests. I'm done. If my mother wants a confrontation, she'll get one. Elliot watched her for a moment, then climbed out of bed himself. Then I'm coming with you. Elliot. No. His voice was firm. We are in this together now. No more facing things alone. No more separate lives. Whatever happens, we face it together. Christy felt something warm unfold in her chest, gratitude and love and the beginning of trust. Together, she agreed. 2 hours later, Christy and Elliot walked into La Grenouille, the elegant French restaurant where New York's elite gathered to see and be seen. Christy's mother was already seated at her usual table, wearing a St. John suit and an expression that could freeze champagne. Patricia Winters had always been a formidable woman, tall and elegant with perfect posture and a way of looking at people that made them immediately aware of their shortcomings. She'd been a debutante in her youth, had married well, and had spent the subsequent decades perfecting the art of social climbing and strategic networking. Looking at her now, Christy wondered how she'd never noticed the coldness in her mother's eyes, the way her smiles never quite reached them, the way she evaluated everything and everyone based on their social utility. Christy. Her mother's voice was icy as they approached. And Elliot. How unexpected. Mother. Christy slid into the seat across from her, and Elliot sat beside her, his hand finding Christy's under the table. You wanted to talk, so let's talk. Patricia's gaze flickered to their joined hands, and her mouth tightened. Not here. This is hardly the place for a private conversation. Why not? Christy kept her voice pleasant but firm. You threatened to go to the press. If you're willing to make our private business public, then surely you can discuss it in a restaurant. Her mother's eyes narrowed. Don't test me, Christy. I'm trying to help you. Help me. Christy couldn't keep the disbelief out of her voice. Help me how, exactly? By blackmailing me into. What? Staying quiet about the fact that my father sold me to save his company. Lower your voice, Patricia hissed, glancing around at the nearby tables. People are staring. Let them stare. But Christy did lower her voice, not out of obedience but because she didn't actually want to cause a scene. Despite everything, some habits were hard to break. You found the investigation file. So you know the truth about my marriage. You know that Dad made a deal with Elliot's father, that I was essentially traded for financial security. Did you know about it, Mom? Were you part of the negotiations? Patricia's expression flickered, just for a moment, and Christy had her answer. You knew, she said, feeling the betrayal like a physical blow. You knew the whole time. Of course I knew. Patricia's voice was sharp. Your father and I made the decision together. It was the best option for everyone involved. Best option. Christy felt Elliot's hand tighten on hers, anchoring her. You sold your daughter like I was a piece of property, and you think that was the best option. Don't be so dramatic. Patricia picked up her water glass with a perfectly manicured hand. You were 25 years old with no prospects, no career, no direction in your life. You were wasting your time with art school and impossible dreams when you should have been securing your future. We gave you the opportunity to marry one of the wealthiest, most successful men in New York. Most daughters would be grateful. Grateful. Christy laughed, a bitter sound. You wanted me to be grateful for being trapped in a loveless marriage? For 3 years of rejection and loneliness? For feeling worthless and unwanted? That was your own fault, Patricia said coldly. If you'd been smart, you would have made yourself indispensable to Elliot. You should have gotten pregnant immediately, secured your position properly. Instead, you moped around like a tragic heroine in a novel. It was pathetic. Elliot started to rise from his seat, but Christy gripped his hand tighter, keeping him in place. This was a fight. Her reckoning. "You're right about one thing," Christy said, her voice steady despite the rage boiling inside her. "I was pathetic. I was pathetic for believing that my parents loved me. I was pathetic for thinking that my father's sudden interest in my social life was genuine care rather than him looking for a buyer. I was pathetic for not seeing that you and Dad were never actually parents. You were social strategists who happened to have a daughter you could leverage for your own advancement. How dare you?" "No, Mother. How dare you?" Christy leaned forward, and she saw her mother actually flinch. "How dare you pretend that what you did was for my benefit? You didn't care about my happiness or my future. You cared about maintaining your social position and saving Dad's company. You sold me, and you convinced yourselves it was love." Patricia's face was white with fury. "You ungrateful little—" "I'm done." Christy stood up, and Elliot immediately stood with her. "I'm done being grateful for crumbs of affection. I'm done pretending we are a happy family. I'm done protecting your reputation and Dad's reputation and playing the role you scripted for me. If you want to go to the press, go ahead. Tell them everything. I don't care anymore. You'll care when every society page in New York is calling you a gold digger," Patricia spat. "You'll care when people realize you were bought and paid for like a—" "Like a what, Mother?" Christy's voice was dangerous now. "Say it. Like a what?" Patricia pressed her lips together, but the word hung between them anyway. "Whore. I'd rather be seen as a gold digger who knew what she was getting into than as the pathetic fool who didn't," Christy said. "At least that would be closer to the truth. And you know what? I don't think you'll go to the press. Because if you do, everyone will know that you sold your daughter. Everyone will know that the perfect Patricia Winters, with her charity boards and her society connections, values money more than her own child. That won't look good at your next luncheon." She turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at her mother. "For what it's worth, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to stop carrying this anger around. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. I'm done with you and Dad. Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't show up at my home. We are finished." Christy walked out of the restaurant with Elliot beside her, and she didn't look back. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright, and Christy stood on the sidewalk taking deep breaths of crisp autumn air, feeling like she'd just escaped from underwater. "Are you okay?" Elliot asked quietly. "No," Christy admitted. "But I will be." Elliot pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while pedestrians streamed past them on the busy Manhattan sidewalk. "I'm so proud of you," he murmured into her hair. "You were magnificent." "I was terrified," Christy confessed. "My hands are still shaking." Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. Elliot pulled back enough to look at her face. "What do you want to do now?" Christy thought about it. She thought about the penthouse that had never felt like home, about the life she'd been living that belonged to someone else, about all the possibilities that suddenly stretched out before her now that she'd finally broken free. "I want to start over," she said. "Really start over. New home, new life, new beginning. Can we do that?" "We can do anything you want," Elliot said. "I meant what I said. I'll spend the rest of my life making you happy." Christy smiled, and it felt like the first genuine smile she'd managed in years. "Then let's go home and start planning our real life. The one we choose together." 3 months after Christy walked out of La Grenouille and out of her mother's life, she stood in the middle of an art gallery in Chelsea, surrounded by her paintings, watching as New York's art world gathered to see the debut exhibition of an unknown artist. Christy Winters, she'd reclaimed her maiden name professionally, wanting to succeed or fail on her own merits rather than as Mrs. Elliot James, had spent the past 3 months painting with an intensity that bordered on possession. The collection she'd created was called The Price of Perfection, and it chronicled her journey from the naive girl who'd believed in fairy tales to the woman who'd learned that real love was so much better than fantasy. The paintings were raw and honest in a way that made some viewers uncomfortable. There was $10 million, a portrait of a woman whose body was covered in price tags. There was separate bedrooms, showing 2 figures on opposite sides of a door that might as well have been a brick wall. There was the performance, depicting a couple at a gala, holding each other close for the cameras while their eyes looked in different directions. But there were also paintings of hope and healing. First Kiss, Real, showed two figures finally coming together after years apart. Morning After captured the vulnerability of two people seeing each other truly for the first time. Together were simply two pairs of hands, joined and holding on tight. Christy had been terrified to exhibit such personal work, but Elliot had encouraged her, had even helped her secure the gallery space through a connection who owed him a favor but didn't know the artist's identity until the paintings were hung. "They're powerful," the gallery owner, Marcus Chen, had said when he first saw them. "Painfully honest. People are going to talk about these." He'd been right. The gallery was packed, and Christy could feel the energy in the room, curiosity and fascination and recognition. Her paintings weren't just her story, they were a lot of people's stories. How many women had felt trapped in relationships that looked perfect from the outside? How many people had sold pieces of themselves for security or approval or acceptance? Christy. Elliot appeared at her elbow, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He looked proud and slightly territorial, like he wanted to tell everyone in the room that the brilliant artist who'd created these paintings was his wife. "There are 3 art critics here, 2 major collectors, and someone from the Whitney. Marcus says you're the talk of the night." Christy felt nervous excitement flutter in her stomach. Is that good or bad? "It's very good." Elliot leaned in and kissed her temple. "You're extraordinary, you know that." Before Christy could respond, a woman's voice cut through the gallery chatter. "Well, this is certainly interesting." Christy turned to find Patricia Winters standing in front of $10 million, her expression unreadable. She was dressed impeccably as always, but there was something different about her, a tiredness around her eyes, a slight slump to her shoulders. "Mother." Christy kept her voice neutral. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I saw the mention in the Times," Patricia said, still looking at the painting. "Christy Winters. I wondered if it was you." They hadn't spoken since the confrontation at La Grenouille 3 months ago. Christy had blocked her mother's number after receiving dozens of alternately threatening and pleading messages. She'd heard through mutual acquaintances that her father had completed his bankruptcy proceedings and moved to Florida, and that her parents' marriage was going through a difficult period, society code for falling apart spectacularly. "If you came here to cause a scene," Elliot began, but Patricia held up her hand. "I came to see my daughter's work," she said quietly. "May I speak with you privately, Christy?" Christy hesitated, then nodded. She handed her champagne glass to Elliot and followed her mother to a quieter corner of the gallery. "I owe you an apology," Patricia said without preamble, and Christy felt her eyebrows rise in surprise. Patricia Winters didn't apologize. Ever. "Actually, I owe you many apologies. For your entire life, probably." "Mother." "Let me finish." Patricia's hands twisted together, an uncharacteristic gesture of nervousness. "These paintings, they made me see what we did to you. What I did to you. I told myself we were securing your future, that we were being good parents by making sure you married well. But looking at these." She gestured to the paintings around them. "I can see the pain we caused you, the loneliness, the feeling of being worthless." Christy felt tears pricking her eyes but refused to let them fall. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because your father and I are getting divorced," Patricia said bluntly. "After 33 years of marriage, we are ending it. And the reason is that I finally understood something. We built our entire life, our marriage, our family, our social position, on the same foundation you and Elliot started with. A transaction. A mutually beneficial arrangement. No love, no real connection, just 2 people using each other to climb higher in society." She looked at Christy directly for the first time. "It was empty. Our whole life together was empty. And I was so busy maintaining the facade that I never even noticed. Not until I saw what we'd done to you, how we'd tried to trap you in the same empty existence we'd chosen for ourselves." Christy didn't know what to say. She'd spent 3 months being angry at her mother, and now that anger was complicated by something unexpected. Pity. "I'm still furious at you," Christy said finally. "You and Dad caused me years of pain. You sold me, Mom. You actually sold me." "I know." Patricia's voice cracked. And I can't undo that. I can't give you back those years or erase that pain. All I can do is apologize and tell you that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Christy. They stood in silence for a moment, and Christy felt the anger she'd been carrying start to shift, start to transform into something more complicated. Not forgiveness exactly. That would take time, if it came at all, but understanding. Her mother wasn't a villain in a story. She was a person who'd made terrible choices, who'd valued the wrong things, who'd hurt her daughter because she'd never learned how to love properly herself. I need time, Christy said finally. I need a lot of time to process this. I'm not ready to just welcome you back into my life. I understand. Patricia nodded. For what it's worth, these paintings are beautiful. You're talented, Christy. Really talented. You should have been doing this all along instead of wasting your time being a society wife. I'm still a society wife, Christy pointed out. I'm just also an artist now. No. Patricia shook her head. You're an artist who happens to be married to someone wealthy. There's a difference. Patricia started to leave, then turned back. He loves you, you know. Elliot. I can see it in the way he looks at you. Whatever deal was made 3 years ago, it's real now. Don't let what your father and I did poison that for you. After her mother left, Christy stood alone for a moment, processing the unexpected encounter. Then Elliot was beside her again, his hand finding hers. Are you okay? He asked. I'm not sure, Christy admitted. That was unexpected. Do you believe her? The apology. Christy thought about it. I think she meant it. I think she's finally realizing what she threw away in pursuit of the perfect life. But believing she meant it doesn't mean I'm ready to forgive and forget. You don't have to, Elliot said. You don't owe her anything. I know. Christy leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. But maybe eventually I'll want to forgive her. Not for her sake, but for mine. Because I'm tired of carrying anger around. They were interrupted by Marcus, who was practically vibrating with excitement. Christy, you need to come meet someone. The Whitney curator wants to talk about including your work in their next contemporary exhibition. This is huge. As Christy let herself be pulled into conversations with critics and collectors and curators, she caught Elliot's eye across the gallery. He was watching her with an expression of pure pride and love, and she felt her heart swell with gratitude, not for his money or his connections or his social position, but for him. For the man who'd finally let down his walls and let her in. For the husband who'd learned to be a partner. Their marriage had started as a transaction, but it had become something real. Something earned through pain and honesty and the hard work of actually choosing each other every single day. Later that night, after the gallery had closed and the crowds had dispersed, Christy and Elliot walked hand in hand through Manhattan. It was late October, and the air had that crisp quality that promised winter was coming. Where are we going? Christy asked as Elliot led her through Central Park. You'll see, he said with a mysterious smile. They ended up at Bethesda Fountain, the same place where Elliot had proposed 3 years ago. Christy remembered that night, how surreal it had felt, how quickly everything had moved, how she'd been swept up in the fairy tale without stopping to question whether it was real. Why are we here? She asked. Elliot took both her hands in his, and in the moonlight, Christy could see the seriousness in his expression. 3 years ago, I brought you here and asked you to marry me, he said. I had a speech prepared about partnership and mutual respect and building a future together. It was a good speech. My PR team helped me write it. But it was all bullshit. Christy couldn't help but smile. I remember. You were very smooth. I was a coward hiding behind pretty words. Elliot took a deep breath. So I wanted to bring you back here and ask you again. Properly this time. To Christy's surprise, Elliot dropped to one knee. Christy Winters James, he said, and his voice was shaking slightly. I'm not asking you to marry me. We are already married, and frankly, the paperwork would be a nightmare to redo. But I'm asking you to choose me. Knowing everything you know now, about how our marriage started, about my cowardice, about the 3 years I wasted being afraid, I'm asking if you'll choose to stay married to me. He pulled out a small box, and inside was a ring, Not the massive diamond he'd given her 3 years ago, but a simple band with small stones that caught the moonlight. This belonged to my grandmother, Elliot explained. The only James family marriage that was actually based on love. She left it to me with a note that said I should only give it to someone I loved with my whole heart, someone I couldn't imagine living without, someone who made me want to be better than I was. Tears were streaming down Christie's face now, and she didn't try to stop them. I love you, Elliot continued. I love your talent and your strength and your courage. I love the way you see the world and the way you make me see it differently. I love how you challenged me and refused to accept the half-life I was offering. I love that you chose to fight for us instead of just walking away when you had every reason to. He looked up at her, and in his eyes Christie saw vulnerability and hope and fear and love all mixed together. So will you choose me, Christie? Will you choose our marriage? Will you choose to build a real life together, with all the mess and complications and beauty that comes with actually being partners? Christie pulled Elliot to his feet and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into that kiss, all her love and hope and joy and determination. Yes, she said when they finally broke apart. Yes, I choose you. I choose us. I choose this messy, complicated, real marriage that we are building together. Elliot slipped the ring onto her finger. She'd already removed the ostentatious diamond and sold it to charity, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. Thank you, Elliot whispered against her hair. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for seeing who I could be instead of just who I was. Thank you for finally letting me see the real you, Christie replied. For being brave enough to be vulnerable. They stood together by the fountain, holding each other tight, and Christie thought about how far they'd come. 3 years ago, she'd been a naive girl who believed in fairy tales. Now she was a woman who understood that real love was so much better than fantasy, messier and harder and more complicated, but also deeper and truer and stronger. Their marriage hadn't started with love, but it had gotten there eventually. Sometimes the most beautiful things grow in unexpected places, from damaged foundations, from broken beginnings. Sometimes you have to lose everything before you can find what actually matters. Christie stood in the newly renovated brownstone in Brooklyn that she and Elliot had bought 6 months ago, putting the finishing touches on her home studio. Through the windows, she could see the tree-lined street where neighbors actually knew each other's names, where life moved at a slightly slower pace than Manhattan, where she and Elliot could build something that was theirs rather than an extension of the James family empire. Elliot had made good on his threat to his father. He'd resigned as CEO of James Industries, though he'd retained his board seat and voting shares. Instead, he'd founded a venture capital firm that focused on ethical business practices and supporting minority entrepreneurs. The work gave him purpose without consuming his entire life. Christie heard the front door open and Elliot's voice calling out, "Christie, are you home?" "In the studio," she called back. Elliot appeared in the doorway, and Christie felt her heart do that same happy skip it had been doing for over a year now. He was loosening his tie, his hair slightly messy, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him during their first 3 years of marriage. "How was your day?" he asked, crossing the room to kiss her. "Good. I finished the commission for the Hartleys, and I have a call with a gallery in Boston tomorrow about a possible exhibition." Christie gestured to her latest painting, a landscape that captured the view from the brownstone's back garden. "How was yours?" "Interesting." Elliot pulled her down onto the paint-splattered couch they'd picked up at a flea market. "I had lunch with my father today." Christie turned to look at him in surprise. Elliot had barely spoken to his father in the past year, beyond necessary business communications. How did that go? Better than expected, actually. Elliot looked thoughtful. "He's sick, Christie. Cancer. Stage 3. He wanted to tell me in person before starting treatment." "Oh, Elliot." Christie took his hand. "I'm so sorry." "I am too." Elliot's voice was quiet. "I'm sorry that he's sick, and I'm also sorry that my first reaction was to wonder if this is some kind of manipulation tactic. That's what he's done to me, made me suspicious of everything, even his illness." "Did he say what he wants? From you, I mean." "He wants to make amends." He actually used those words, "make amends," which is the closest thing to an apology I've ever heard from him. Elliot shook his head. "He wants to have regular dinners, to try to build some kind of relationship before he starts treatment and might not be able to. What do you want? Christy asked. Elliot thought about it. I don't know. Part of me wants to tell him it's too late, that you don't get to ignore your children for decades and then demand a relationship when you're facing mortality. But another part of me thinks, I don't want to have regrets. I don't want to wonder if I should have tried harder, been more forgiving. Then try, Christy said softly. Not for him, for you. You can set boundaries, you can protect yourself, but at least give him the chance to be better. Give yourself the chance to not have regrets. Elliot pulled her close. When did you get so wise? Around the same time I started standing up for myself instead of letting people treat me like property, Christy said with a slight smile. Funny how that works. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Elliot said, There's something else. I got a call from your mother today. Christy tensed. She and Patricia had been rebuilding their relationship slowly over the past year. Coffee once a month, brief phone calls, carefully neutral conversations. It was better than the complete estrangement of the first few months, but it was still fragile. What did she want? To invite us to Thanksgiving. She's hosting at her new apartment in Gramercy. Your aunt from Florida will be there, and apparently your father is coming too. My father. Christy hadn't spoken to her father at all since the divorce. He'd sent a few emails that she'd deleted without reading. Why? According to your mother, he's been in therapy, actually working on himself, trying to understand why he made the choices he did. He wants to apologize to you in person. Christy felt a complicated mix of emotions, anger and curiosity and hope and skepticism all tangled together. I don't know if I'm ready to see him, she admitted. You don't have to be, Elliot said immediately. You don't owe him anything. If you want to skip Thanksgiving entirely, we can go somewhere just the two of us. Christy thought about it. A year ago, even 6 months ago, she would have said no automatically, would have protected herself by maintaining complete distance. But she'd learned something over the past year. Healing wasn't linear, and forgiveness wasn't weakness. I think I want to try, she said finally. I want to hear what he has to say. And if it's not genuine, if it's just more manipulation, then I'll know. But at least I'll know I gave him the chance. Are you sure? No, Christy admitted. But I'm sure that I don't want to live my life being ruled by anger and fear. I want to be open to possibilities. I want to believe that people can change. Elliot kissed her forehead. Have I told you today how much I love you? Not in the last hour, Christy said with a smile. You're slipping. I love you, Elliot murmured against her lips. I love your courage and your open heart and your willingness to believe in second chances even when you have every reason not to. I love you too, Christy replied. Even though you put me through 3 years of hell before finally getting your act together. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for those 3 years, Elliot promised. You've been saying that for a year, Christy teased. At what point do we consider the debt? 1 year after standing at Bethesda Fountain and choosing each other again, Christy and Elliot had built something neither of them had ever expected. A real life, messy and complicated and utterly genuine. Thanksgiving arrived with unseasonably warm weather, and Christy stood in front of her mirror adjusting her dress, a simple navy blue piece she'd chosen herself, not something selected by a stylist or approved by society standards. Elliot appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Last chance to back out, he said softly. We can be on a plane to anywhere you want within 2 hours. Christy leaned back against him, drawing strength from his presence. No. I need to do this. For me. Patricia's new apartment in Gramercy was smaller than the sprawling penthouse Christy had grown up visiting, but it felt warmer somehow. When Patricia opened the door, Christy was struck by how much her mother had changed, softer somehow, with less armor and more authenticity in her expression. Christy. Elliot. Thank you for coming. Patricia's voice was genuine, without the calculated politeness Christy remembered. Your father is in the living room. He's nervous. Christy squeezed Elliot's hand and walked into the living room. Her father stood by the window, and she was shocked by his appearance. Richard Winters had always been imposing, tall and commanding with the kind of presence that filled a room. Now he looked diminished, older than his 60 years, with grey hair and tired eyes that held something Christy had never seen before: remorse. Christy. His voice cracked slightly. Thank you for agreeing to see me. They sat down, Christy and Elliot on one couch, her parents separated on chairs, a visual representation of how their family had fractured and was tentatively trying to reform. I've been in therapy, Richard began without preamble. For 8 months now. Dr. Morrison has helped me understand some difficult truths about myself, about the choices I've made, the way I've treated the people I supposedly love. He looked directly at Christy for the first time. I sold you. That's the truth of it, stripped of all the rationalizations and justifications I told myself. I was desperate and drowning and terrified of losing everything I built, and instead of finding an honest solution, I traded my daughter like she was an asset on a balance sheet. Christy felt tears building but refused to let them fall. Why are you telling me this now? Why not 3 years ago? Or a year ago? Why now? Because a year ago, I wasn't ready to admit what I'd done, Richard said honestly. I was still telling myself that I'd done the right thing, that I'd secured your future, that any father would have done the same. It took losing your mother, losing my company, losing everything I thought defined me to finally understand that I'd already lost the most important thing: my daughter's trust and love. He pulled out a worn envelope from his jacket pocket. This is a check for $10 million. The amount Elliot paid me for brokering your marriage. I've spent the last year liquidating everything I had left to pull this money together. It's not exact. I'm still about $200,000 short, but it's as close as I could get. Richard held out the envelope to Elliot. I can't undo what I did. I can't give Christy back those 3 years of pain. But I can return the money and remove the transaction from our history. This marriage started as a business deal. I'm closing that deal and voiding the contract. Elliot looked at Christy, silently asking what she wanted him to do. Christy stared at the envelope, at the physical representation of her worth to her father, at the price tag that had hung around her neck for 3 years. I don't want the money, she said finally. Keep it, donate it, burn it, I don't care. Because that's not what I need from you, Dad. Then what do you need? Richard's voice was thick with emotion. I need to know that you understand what you did to me, Christy said, and now the tears were flowing freely. I need to know that you understand that your daughter spent 3 years feeling worthless and unlovable and trapped because you valued your company more than her happiness. I need to know that you see me as a person, not as an asset. I do, Richard said, his own eyes wet. God, Christy, I do. And I'm so sorry. I'm so desperately sorry for every moment of pain I caused you. You deserved a father who protected you, who valued you for who you are, not for what you could provide. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. They sat in heavy silence for a moment, and then Christy spoke the words she'd never thought she'd be able to say: I forgive you. Richard's head snapped up in shock. What? I forgive you, Christy repeated, and she felt the words settle into her bones, felt the weight of anger and resentment starting to lift. Not because you've earned it or because what you did was okay. It wasn't. It was terrible and selfish, and it caused me years of pain. But I forgive you because I don't want to carry that anger anymore. I forgive you because holding on to it was poisoning me. I forgive you for my sake, not yours. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Richard whispered. No, you don't, Christy agreed. But I'm giving it anyway. That's what forgiveness is, a gift that benefits the giver more than the receiver. Patricia spoke for the first time, her voice soft. You're a better person than either of us deserves, Christy. I'm a person who's learned that perfection is a prison, Christy replied. I'm a person who's learned that real love, real family, isn't about transactions or appearances or maintaining a perfect facade. It's about choosing each other even when it's hard, even when it's messy, even when it would be easier to walk away. She looked at Elliot, who was watching her with so much love and pride that it made her heart ache. My marriage started as a transaction, but it became real because we chose to make it real. We chose honesty over perfection. We chose vulnerability over protection. We chose each other. Elliot raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. Every single day, I choose you. And I choose you, Christy replied. Richard cleared his throat. Does this mean, can we try? Can we try to build something real? Not the father-daughter relationship we should have had, but something new, something honest. Christy considered it. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, naive and trusting and desperate for her parents' approval. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth, who understood that love wasn't transactional, who had learned that the only approval she needed was her own. We can try, she said finally, but it has to be on my terms. Therapy together, not just you alone. Honest conversations, even when they're difficult. Real accountability for the harm you caused. And understanding that trust takes time to rebuild and might never be fully restored. I'll do whatever it takes, Richard said fervently. We both will, Patricia added. The Thanksgiving dinner that followed was awkward at times, emotional at others, but ultimately real in a way that none of their previous family gatherings had ever been. They talked about Richard's therapy revelations and Patricia's journey to independence. They discussed Christy's growing success as an artist and Elliot's new venture capital firm. They shared stories and laughter and even a few tears that IT wasn't perfect. But perfection, Christy had learned, was overrated. Later that night, Christy and Elliot walked along the Brooklyn Heights promenade, looking across the water at the Manhattan skyline glittering in the darkness. Christy thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, standing in that same penthouse apartment, feeling invisible and worthless, believing that her life was over before it had really begun. What are you thinking about? Elliot asked, pulling her closer against the November chill. How much has changed? Christy replied. How much I've changed. You were always strong, Elliot said. You were always brave. You just needed to see it yourself. We both needed to see ourselves clearly, Christy corrected. You needed to stop hiding behind guilt and see that you're capable of real love. I needed to stop seeking validation from people who were never going to give it and learn to validate myself. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights reflect off the water, and Christy felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. Her life wasn't perfect. Her relationship with her parents would always be complicated. Her marriage had scars that might never fully fade, but it was real. It was honest. It was hers. I have something to tell you, Christy said, turning to face Elliot. She'd been waiting for the right moment, and this felt like it, standing together looking at the city where their story had begun, having just chosen forgiveness and hope over anger and resentment. What is it? Elliot's expression was curious, slightly concerned. Christy took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. We are going to have a baby. Elliot's eyes widened, and she watched emotions flicker across his face. Shock, joy, fear, wonder, love. A baby. Are you sure? I found out yesterday. I'm 8 weeks along. Christy smiled at his expression. I know we said we'd wait, but apparently the universe had other plans. A baby, Elliot repeated, and then he was lifting her off her feet, spinning her around, laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, his eyes were wet. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy? Christy asked, though she could already see the answer on his face. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Elliot said, kneeling down and pressing his forehead gently against her stomach. Hello in there. This is your dad. I'm going to do everything in my power to be the father you deserve. I'm going to love you and support you and never, never treat you like you're anything less than the most precious gift in the world. Christy ran her fingers through his hair, feeling tears stream down her face. We are going to be good parents, she said with certainty, because we know what not to do, because we've learned from our mistakes, because we choose each other and will choose our child every single day. Elliot stood and pulled her into his arms. 3 years ago, I married you for all the wrong reasons. Today, I'm grateful every single day that I did, because it led us here, to this moment, to this life, to this future we are building together. No more transactions, Christy said. No more transactions, Elliot agreed. Just love. Real, messy, complicated, beautiful love. They kissed as the Manhattan skyline sparkled before them, Two people who'd started as strangers in an arranged marriage and had become true partners through pain and honesty and the daily choice to love each other despite everything. Christy Winters James had been sold for $10 million, had spent 3 years in a loveless marriage, had been rejected and neglected and made to feel worthless, but she'd reclaimed herself. She'd found her voice. She'd built a life that was hers, and now, standing in her husband's arms with their child growing inside her, looking toward a future filled with possibility and hope, Christy understood the most important truth of all. She had never needed to be claimed by anyone. She had always belonged to herself. Her worth had never been $10 million or any amount of money. Her worth was infinite, immeasurable, absolute. And she had finally learned to see at point 3 years of rejection and pain had led to a lifetime of authentic love. A marriage built on a transaction had transformed into a partnership built on truth. And a woman who'd been sold like property had become an artist, a wife, a mother-to-be, and most importantly, herself. The fairy tale Christy had believed in at the beginning hadn't been real. But what she'd found, what she'd built, was so much better than any fairy tale could ever be. It was real life, with all its complications and challenges and unexpected beauty, and it was finally, truly, hers. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe for more beautiful stories. Like and comment where you are watching from.